There are rules to surviving out here, and the first one is you never, ever leave the highway. But what do you do when your own truck starts dying and a voice on the radio gives you one choice? Take the dirt road to nowhere or become a wreck on the interstate. They say isolation can make a man paranoid, that you can imagine a conspiracy in the hiss of an air leak. They want me to believe I just panicked, but they weren't there. Listen to my story. Listen to how the trap was sprung. And tell me, what would you have done? The hum is the first thing you learn to trust. Not the roar of the engine. That's the beast's heart, loud and proud. No, the hum. The low, steady vibration that comes up through the floorboards, through the 18 wheels on the pavement, and into your bones. It's the sound of everything working right. For 22 years, that hum has been my mantra, the lullaby that's carried me over 3 million miles of American asphalt. My rig, a Peterbilt 389 I call the Iron Saint, she's been my only constant partner. Tonight, she was humming a perfect tune, a deep baritone note that said all was right with the world. We were rolling west on I-80, having just crossed from the Wyoming Badlands into the vast, empty gut of Nevada. The sun had bled out across the horizon an hour ago, leaving a bruised purple sky that was slowly hardening into a star-flecked obsidian dome. This is the part of the country I call the Great Nothing. It's beautiful in a way that can kill you if you're not paying attention. Flat, desolate, and so quiet you can hear your own thoughts echo. I was hauling a full load of high-end server components, bound for a new data center just outside Reno. 40,000 pounds of delicate, expensive silicon that was worth more than my house. The manifest was sealed, the bills were in order, and I was making good time. Just another day at the office. I had my coffee in the cup holder, a classic country station murmuring low on the radio, and my eyes were doing their endless dance. Road, left mirror, right mirror, Gage's road. It's a rhythm, a meditation. That's why the crackle of the CB was so jarring. I keep it on channel 19, mostly for the nostalgia. Most of the chatter these days is just static and fools on skip. But this voice was different. It came through clean, but with a strange filtered quality, like it was being run through some kind of software. Evening out there, driver. That's a heavy load for a lonely road. I didn't think much of it. Could be anyone. I keyed the mic. Yeah, she's sitting low and pretty, I said, my voice gravelly, keeping the rubber side down. I waited for a response, a handle, a where you headed? But there was only silence, a dead hiss that seemed louder than the voice had been. Strange. I shrugged it off. 10 minutes passed. The miles peeled away under my headlights. Then the voice was back. Same calm, synthetic tone. She's a fine-looking Peterbilt. The Iron Saint. Suits her. My hand tightened on the steering wheel. The name of my truck is painted on the cab doors in neat, unassuming script. Someone would have to be close, with good eyes or binoculars, to read it in the dark. I scanned my mirrors. Far behind me, maybe a mile back, was a single pair of headlights. They'd been there for the last 20 minutes, keeping a perfect, steady distance. Not unusual. Could be another trucker pacing me for company. Still, a knot of unease tightened in my gut. I didn't key the mic this time. I just listened. The highway stretched on, a black ribbon disappearing into a blacker void. The silence in the cab felt heavy now, expectant. Another 15 minutes. The headlights were still there, a persistent ghost in my mirrors. Then the CB crackled again, and the voice that came through turned my blood to ice. You're pushing it, Jack. Gotta make that Reno delivery by 0300, but don't burn yourself out. Jack, not driver, not good buddy. Jack, my name. No one on the road knows my name. My dispatch calls me by my unit number. My bills of lading list my full name, Jackson Rourke, but those are sealed and tucked away. My pulse hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't some bored local. This was something else. My professional calm, the one honed over 2 decades of close calls in bad weather, was fracturing. My first thought was my load. Hijackers. But this felt different. Too clean, too quiet. I made a decision. It was the only professional, logical thing to do. There was a rest area marked 5 miles ahead. I wasn't going to run, not yet. I needed to stop, check my rig, and think. Maybe it was a setup for a DOT shakedown. Maybe they were just trying to spook me. I needed to get out of the cab, put my boots on solid ground, and look my truck over with my own eyes. I flipped my turn signal, the rhythmic clicking a counterpoint to the frantic beating of my own heart. I eased the iron Saint down the off-ramp and into the poorly lit, utterly deserted rest area. I pulled into a spot at the far end, away from the bathroom block, giving myself a clear view of the entrance. The engine idled down with a throaty sigh. I killed the lights and just sat there for a full minute, watching the ramp. The headlights that had been tailing me didn't follow. They just continued on down the interstate, disappearing over a slight rise. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong it made me feel weak. Maybe I was just overtired, spooked by the dark and the isolation. I grabbed my flashlight and my tire thumper from behind the seat. "Get a grip, Rourke," I muttered, swinging the cab door open. The cold Nevada air bit at my face. I started my walk around, the familiar routine of comfort. Driver's side tires, check. Fuel tanks, check. Trailer tandems, check. Everything looked good. I worked my way around the back of the trailer, my flashlight beam cutting a clean white circle in the oppressive darkness. I crouched down to check the airlines and the brake chambers on the rear axle, just like I'd done 1,000 times before. And then my light caught it. Tucked high on the frame, almost invisible against the grimy steel, was a small, black box. It was no bigger than a pack of cigarettes, held in place by a powerful magnet. On its face, a single green LED blinked slowly, methodically. A steady, silent pulse in the heart of the great nothing. It was a GPS tracker, and it was active. For a second, I just stared at it. The blinking green light seemed to pulse in time with the frantic thrumming in my ears. 1, 2, 3, a slow, steady heartbeat that wasn't mine. My own was a frantic drum solo against my ribs. The cold wasn't just from the desert air anymore. It was a deep, internal chill, the kind that starts in your marrow and works its way out. That little box was a violation. It turned the Iron Saint, my home, my fortress, into a cage on wheels. They hadn't just been following me, they'd been riding with me. Every mile, every stop, every quiet moment alone in the cab. My first instinct was pure animal panic. Rip it off, smash it to pieces, and get the hell out of there. But 22 years on the road teaches you to kill panic before it kills you. I took a breath, the frigid air stinging my lungs. I needed to think. This wasn't random. Random thugs don't use trackers and call you by name on a CB. This was professional, coordinated, and that thought, oddly, was the first rung on a ladder my mind could actually climb. Amateurs are unpredictable. Professionals have motives, rules. You can reason with rules. I pulled out my multi-tool, the worn steel familiar and comforting in my shaking hand. I wedged the flathead screwdriver bit between the magnet and the frame of my trailer in pride. The magnet was strong, fighting me for a second before it let go with a sharp clack. The box fell into my palm. It was cheap plastic, unbranded, with no serial numbers I could see. The blinking light seemed brighter now, accusatory. I felt watched. The darkness beyond the meager glow of the rest stop lights felt alive, filled with unseen eyes. I scanned the low hills surrounding the pull-off, seeing nothing but sagebrush and shadow. I carried the box back to the cab, moving quickly, my boots crunching on the loose gravel. Once inside, with the door locked, I felt marginally safer. I laid the tracker on a passenger seat. The blinking continued its silent, infuriating rhythm. My mind was racing, trying to stitch the pieces together. The voice, the name, the tracker. Who? Why? Then, a thought surfaced, an explanation so mundane, so infuriatingly plausible, that it began to smother the fear with a hot blanket of anger. Mavic Logistics. My company. For the last 6 months, they've been on a big corporate kick. Synergy, efficiency, asset management. They tried to install driver-facing cameras, which half the old-timers, myself included, threatened to quit over. They'd pushed a new e-log system that felt more like a parole bracelet than a work tool. What if this was the next step? Secretly tracking high-value loads to satisfy some insurance underwriter in a corner office in Chicago? It made a sick kind of sense. It would explain the professionalism. It would explain how they knew my name and my route. Corporate spies, not highway pirates. The anger felt good. It was solid ground. Fear is a fog, but anger is a weapon. The voice on the CB, though, that didn't quite fit. It sounded too sinister for a corporate bean counter. But maybe it was just some third-party security contractor they hired, some wannabe tough guy getting his kicks by spooking the driver to see how he'd react. A test. Yeah, a stupid, dangerous, liability nightmare of a test. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became. This wasn't a hijacking. This was a corporate leash, and they were yanking it. A grim smile touched my lips. Okay, Mavik, you want to play games? I picked up the tracker, opened the door just a crack, and tossed it onto the pavement. Then I put the iron seine in gear, rolled the front steer tire right over the top of it. The crunch of plastic was immensely satisfying. I put the truck in reverse and did it again for good measure. I got out, kicked the shattered pieces into the darkness, and climbed back into my seat. I felt a surge of defiant adrenaline. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold fury. I'd have a few choice words for my dispatcher. Mark, come morning. Hell, I might just call my lawyer. I grabbed the gear shift, ready to get back on the I-80 and finish my run. This was a violation of trust, but the immediate physical threat felt neutralized. I was just a trucker again, fighting the bosses, not some ghost in the dark. I keyed the CB mic, a bit of bravado in my voice. Funny games, fellas. You can tell the suits in Chicago the test is over. Silence. I clicked off the mic, shook my head, and merged back onto the empty interstate. The hum of the engine was comforting again. I was back in control. I drove for 2 solid miles, the rest area disappearing in my mirrors. I was starting to rehearse the speech I was going to give Mark. It was going to be epic. Then the CB crackled to life, and the same filtered, chillingly calm voice spoke, cutting through my anger like a shard of ice. That was a mistake, Jack. Breaking our toy doesn't make you invisible. We can still see you. The voice hung in the cab, thick and venomous. My bravado evaporated, replaced by a cold dread that felt like swallowing powdered glass. We can still see you. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact delivered with the casual certainty of a god. My false explanation, the comforting illusion of a corporate leash, shattered into a million pieces. MTech Logistics didn't operate like this. No company did. This was something else entirely. This was hostile. My foot instinctively pressed down on the accelerator. The Peterbilt's engine roared in protest as I pushed it past 80, then 85. The hum was gone, replaced by a high-pitched scream of straining metal. The road ahead was a hypnotic tunnel of white lines rushing into the abyss. My eyes flicked constantly to the mirrors. Nothing. Just miles of empty, moonlit desert behind me. But the feeling of being watched was more intense than ever. It was a physical pressure against the back of my neck. I grabbed the CB mic, my hands slick with sweat. Who is this? What do you want? The reply was instantaneous, the filtered voice laced with a new, sharper edge. What we want is for you to follow instructions. You had your chance to do this the easy way. Now, take the next exit. Exit 216, Ryerson Creek Road. You have 1 minute. Exit 216. I knew that exit. It wasn't even an exit, really. Just a dirt track that peeled off into the salt flats and disappeared. A service road for ranchers or prospectors, maybe. It went nowhere. It was a trap. Every instinct, every ounce of my 22 years of experience screamed at me to keep my foot planted on the floor, to outrun them, to get to the lights and people of Elko, still 60 miles away. Negative. I spat into the mic, my voice tight. You want this load? You can come and get it. The laughter that came back over the speaker wasn't human. It was a digitized, grating sound like static being shaped into a sneer. Oh, Jack, we already have it. Exit 216. 45 seconds. My eyes darted to my gauges. Oil pressure good. Temperature, rising but stable. Air pressure. My stomach lurched. The needle on the primary air tank gauge was dropping. Not fast, but with a slow, steady certainty. I watched, mesmerized with horror as it ticked down. 110 psi. 105, 100. The warning buzzer for low air pressure would kick in any second. Without air pressure, my brakes would lock up. The entire rig, 80,000 pounds of rolling steel and silicon, would become an immovable monument on the shoulder of Interstate 80. Sabotage. When I was at the rest stop, crouched down checking the axles where I found the tracker, they must have done something. A slow leak. A pinprick in a primary airline. Maybe precise. Calculated. They knew I'd stop. They'd herded me into that rest area like a steer into a chute, and while I was distracted by the decoy, the tracker, they'd cripple my truck. The trap hadn't been the rest area. The rest area was just the tool. The interstate was the trap. The low air pressure alarm screamed to life, a high-pitched, insistent wail that cut through the cab and straight into my panic centers. 90 psi, 85. The exit sign for 216 was rushing toward me, glowing a ghostly green in my headlights. I had no choice. Slamming on the brakes now would just lock them up faster. Staying on the interstate meant becoming a sitting duck for whatever was out there in the dark, and for any innocent four-wheeler that might come screaming around the bend and plow into my rear. My hands felt like they belonged to someone else as I fought the wheel, wrestling the iron saint off the highway and onto the washboard dirt of Ryerson Creek Road. The truck bucked and groaned as it left the smooth asphalt. The air pressure gauge dropped past 70. I pumped the brakes, trying to bleed off speed without locking them solid, but it was a losing battle. With a final, violent hiss, the air gave out completely. The spring brakes engaged with a deafening series of cannon shot reports, and the entire rig shuddered to a dead stop, throwing me hard against my seatbelt. The engine was still running, but we weren't going anywhere. The silence that followed the alarm was absolute. I sat there, breathing hard, the smell of hot diesel and my own fear filling the cab. I was miles from the highway, on a road to nowhere, in a truck that couldn't move. I had lost. I looked out the windshield into the impenetrable darkness. The dirt road ahead was swallowed by shadow. I killed the engine, plunging the world into total blackness, save for the faint glow of the dash lights. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then, the CB crackled one last time. The filtered voice was calm again, all trace of the mocking laughter gone. It was the voice of a man who had just closed a deal. "Good boy, Jack. Now leave the keys on the dash, get out of the truck, and start walking back toward the highway. Don't look back. Don't look back." The words were in order, cold and final. Every survival instinct screamed at me to obey. They had my truck, my load. They had me. Walking away meant living. It was the smart play, the only play. But as I reached for the door handle, something else took over. It wasn't bravery. It was a cold, hard knot of professional pride. 22 years I'd been driving. I've faced down blizzards in the Rockies, stared into the teeth of tornadoes on the plains, and navigated the concrete jungles of LA and New York. I never lost a load. I never abandoned my rig. The Iron Saint wasn't just a machine. She was a part of me. Leaving her here to be picked apart by vultures felt like cutting off my own arm. I didn't get out. I stayed in my seat, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I was defying them. I was changing the rules of their game, and I had no idea what the penalty was. I scanned the impenetrable blackness outside my windows, my eyes straining to find a shape, a movement, a reflection. Nothing. It felt like I was at the bottom of the ocean. Minutes crawled by. 5, 10. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. Was this another test? Were they waiting to see if I'd follow orders? The thought gave me a sliver of hope, a belief that I still had some agency in this nightmare. Maybe they weren't out there at all. Maybe they were miles away, waiting for me to leave so they could send in a driver to fix the airline and take the truck. It was a fragile hope, but it was all I had. Then I saw it. To my left, far out in the sagebrush, maybe 200 yards away, a light flickered on. It wasn't a flashlight beam. It was a small, focused pinprick of red light, like the tip of a laser sight. It hovered in the darkness for a moment, unervingly steady. Then another one blinked on, about 50 feet to the right of the first. And another, and another. Within 30 seconds, a perfect, silent semicircle of red lights had materialized in the desert, boxing me in. They didn't move, they didn't waver. They just watched. This wasn't some grease-stained hijacking crew with tire irons and pistols. This was military. The precision, the silence, the technology. The way they disabled my truck, herded me here, and now contained me. It spoke of a level of organization that was terrifying. These weren't ancient evils or supernatural spirits. This was something far more grounded and, in that moment, far more horrifying. This was the cold, efficient malice of men who knew exactly what they were doing. The filtered voice returned, not on the CB this time, but from somewhere else. It took me a second to place it. It was coming from my own phone, which was sitting dark and silent in its cradle on the dash. The screen lit up, displaying an unknown number. Before I could even think to reach for it, the voice spoke through the phone's speaker, clear and sharp in the confines of the cab. "You're a stubborn man, Jack. We admire that. But stubborn men end up in shallow graves in the desert. We know you're still in the cab. We can see the heat signature from your body. We cut your main airline, but we can also disable your electronics, override your door locks, and pump the cab full of sedative gas if we choose. We're not asking you to get out. We are telling you." My blood ran cold. They'd hacked my phone. They were watching me in thermal. They could control my truck's systems remotely. The rules of the road, of physics, of mechanics, of common sense, didn't apply anymore. I was inside a lockbox, and they held every key. My truck wasn't a fortress. It was a cage they had built around me. The small act of defiance of staying in my seat was meaningless. It was like a lab rat refusing to run a maze while the scientists watched on a monitor, their fingers hovering over the buttons that control the shocks. I felt a profound, soul-crushing despair. This wasn't a fight I could win. This wasn't about a load of servers anymore. This was about power, about control, and they had all of it. The red lights in the desert seemed to press in a physical weight on the cab. They weren't just watching, they were waiting, judging. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my hands where they could be seen through the windshield, a gesture of absolute surrender. The voice came from my phone again, a tone of finality in its synthetic rasp. "That's better. Now, for the last time, get out of the truck. Leave the keys, leave your phone, and start walking. You have 10 seconds before we reconsider our non-lethal approach." 10 seconds. The countdown started in my head, each tick of an imaginary clock a hammer blow to my resolve. My pride, my stubbornness, it all crumbled to dust. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution being stayed. I shoved my wallet into my back pocket, a small, stupid act of keeping something of myself, and left my phone in its cradle, its screen still glowing with the unknown number. The keys stayed in the ignition. I didn't look at the passenger seat where the shattered remnants of the first tracker lay. It felt like a lifetime ago. With my hand still raised, I unlocked the door. The click of the mechanism was deafening in the silence. I pushed the door open and swung my legs out, planting my boots on the dry, cracked earth of Ryerson Creek Road. The air was frigid, and the silence outside the cab was even more profound. No wind, no crickets, just the immense, crushing quiet of the Nevada Basin. I stood by the side of my truck, a hulking shadow in the moonlight, and resisted the overwhelming urge to look back at the semicircle of red lights. "Don't look back," the voice had said. It was the one rule I felt compelled to obey. I started walking. My boots crunched on the gravelly dirt, the sound unnaturally loud. Each step was an act of will. I was walking away from my life, from the only thing I knew. The lights of the interstate were a faint, hazy glow on the horizon, a distant shore that seemed 100 miles away. It was my only landmark, my only hope. I kept my eyes fixed on it, a mantra in my mind. Just keep walking, just get to the highway. The walk was grueling. The road was uneven, and the air was thin and cold. My breath plumed in front of my face. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The Iron Saint was just a dark shape now, indistinguishable from the shadows around it. The red lights were gone. A wave of dizziness and relief washed over me. They let me go. They just wanted the truck. I was alive. I finally stumbled onto the shoulder of the I-80, my legs aching, my lungs burning. Cars and trucks roared past, their headlights slicing through the darkness. each one an entire world away from mine. They were still in the real world, a world of schedules and destinations. I was a ghost on the side of the road. I waited for a break in the traffic, then trudged across the lanes to a called box I'd spotted on the median. It was an old, solar-powered model, a relic from before cell phones were everywhere. I picked up the receiver. It was dead. Of course it was. They thought of everything. Defeated, I sat on the guardrail, the cold steel biting through my jeans. I had to flag someone down. But what would I say? My truck was just hijacked by a team of invisible military-grade ghosts who talked through my phone. They'd think I was drunk or crazy. They'd leave me in the dust. I needed a story. A simple one. Headlights approached. A state trooper. A bubble of hope inflated in my chest. This was it. Law enforcement. They had to help me. I stood up and waved my arms, stepping just far enough into the lane to be seen, but not to get myself killed. The cruiser slowed, its spotlight sweeping over me, blinding me. It pulled onto the shoulder 20 feet ahead, and a man got out. He was tall, silhouetted against the strobing blue and red lights. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. "Everything all right out here?" he called, his voice a calm, authoritative baritone. He had the classic trooper look, flat-brimmed hat, creased uniform, a hand resting casually on his hip near his sidearm. "Officer, thank God," I said, my voice cracking with relief. I started toward him. "My truck, it's been stolen. Hijacked. Back on a dirt road about 2 miles east of here." The trooper stood his ground, letting me approach. He didn't pull out a notepad. He just watched me, his face cast in shadow by the brim of his hat. "Hijacked, you say? That's a serious accusation. What was your cargo?" "Server components. High value. Look, they forced me off the road. They disabled my truck. They had trackers. I stopped myself. I had to sound credible. They were professionals. They had me surrounded. They made me walk away." The trooper nodded slowly, as if he'd heard this story 100 times before. "And they just let you go?" "Yes. They just wanted the truck and the load." He took a step closer, and for the first time, the flashing lights illuminated his face. He was older than I thought, with tired eyes and a grin set to his mouth. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my empty hands, my missing phone. "I see," he said, his calm voice dropping a little lower. "And what's your name, driver?" "Rourke. Jackson Rourke." The trooper's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was a look of profound disappointment, of pity. He sighed, a weary, drawn-out sound. "We were hoping you'd be smarter than this, Jack." The world stopped. The roar of the highway, the strobing lights, the cold. It all faded away. He called me Jack. He knew. He wasn't an ally. He was one of them. The bubble of hope didn't just burst. It imploded, leaving a vacuum in my chest. The law, my last resort, my sanctuary was part of it. My mind refused to process it for a second. The trooper's words echoed in the space between us, a death sentence delivered with a sigh of disappointment. He was one of them. The highway patrol, the symbol of order and safety out here in the great nothing, was compromised. This wasn't just a crew of hijackers. It was a conspiracy, a web, and I just walked from one strand of it right into another. The hope that had carried me for 2 agonizing miles across the desert floor curdled into pure, stomach-turning terror. "What were you talking about?" I stammered, taking an involuntary step back. My brain was screaming run, but my legs felt like they were bolted to the asphalt. Where could I run to? I was on a strip of concrete in the middle of nowhere, and the only authority figure for 100 miles was the monster standing in front of me. The trooper, this man who was supposed to be my savior, just shook his head slowly. The pity in his eyes was real, and that made it 1,000 times worse. "The plan was simple, Jack. You walk away, we take the cargo, everything is clean. You call dispatch in the morning, report it's stolen from the rest stop. By the time anyone looks, the truck is wiped, dumped, and we're all ghosts. Plausible deniability. Insurance pays out. Everybody wins." He took another step closer. His hand never left his hip, a constant, calm reminder of the power he held. "But you couldn't just follow the instructions, could you? You had to be a hero. You had to stay in the cab. You had to come out here and to try to be a witness." He sighed again, the sound full of a performer's practiced weariness. "Now you've made things complicated." You made it messy. My heart was a jackhammer. He wasn't just admitting it. He was explaining it to me, laying out the blueprint of my own demise as if I were a slow-witted student. This was the betrayal, not just of my trust, but of the very fabric of the world I understood. Cops were cops. Robbers were robbers. The line between them was supposed to be clear and bright. Here, in the flashing red and blue lights, that line had been erased. I had to do something. Fight or flight. The ancient lizard part of my brain took over. I wasn't a young man, but I was big, and I had a lifetime of hard, physical work behind me. He was just one man. I glanced past him at the dark interior of his cruiser. If I could get to his car, to his radio, as if reading my mind, the trooper's fake smile vanished. Don't even think about it. But it was too late. Desperation is its own kind of fuel. With a yell that was more animal than human, I lunged. Not at him, but to his side, trying to get past him to make a break for the cruiser. I didn't even make it 2 steps. His movement was a blur. He wasn't a tired, middle-aged cop. He was coiled steel. He pivoted, and something hard and heavy slammed into the side of my head. The world exploded in a flash of white light and searing pain. I hit the asphalt hard, my shoulder taking most of the impact. The side of my face was numb, then on fire. The taste of blood filled my mouth. I rolled onto my stomach, gasping, trying to push myself up. A heavy boot planted itself squarely in the middle of my back, pinning me to the ground, forcing the air from my lungs in a ragged gasp. I really didn't want to do this, the trooper's voice said from above me, the calm tone completely gone, replaced by a cold, businesslike anger. You truckers, you think because you own the road, you're untouchable. I felt a sharp prick in the side of my neck, a sting like a wasp. My muscles immediately began to feel heavy, sluggish. My vision started to swim, the strobing red and blue lights melting together into a chaotic, psychedelic swirl. A powerful sedative. They were prepared for everything. You should have just kept walking, Jack, the trooper's voice said, sounding distant now, as if coming from the end of a long tunnel. You should have just kept walking. My limbs were turning to lead. The world was dissolving into a dark, syrupy fog. I tried to fight it, to hold on to consciousness, but it was like trying to swim up a waterfall. My last coherent thought was of the Iron Saint, sitting alone and crippled in the darkness. I hadn't just lost my truck. I hadn't just been betrayed. I had willingly walked right back to my captors, begging for help, and they had welcomed me with open arms before pulling the hood over my head. The darkness took me completely, a soft, final curtain falling on my failed escape. I came to in pieces. First, a dull, throbbing ache behind my right eye. Then, the feeling of a rough, scratchy blanket against my cheek. Then, the smell. Stale coffee, cheap disinfectant, and something else, something vaguely sweet and rotten, like old flowers left in a vase too long. I pried my eyelids open. They felt like they were lined with sand. The light was dim, coming from a single, fly-speck fluorescent bulb overhead that flickered with a low, electrical buzz. I wasn't in a police car or a jail cell. I was lying on a cot in a small, windowless room. The walls were paneled with that cheap, fake wood laminate from the 70s, stained and peeling at the corners. There was a metal door with a small, barred window set in it. I pushed myself up, my head swimming. The sedative still clung to me like a shroud, making every movement feel slow and deliberate. I was weak, but the fog was clearing. I took stock. I was still in my clothes. My wallet was gone. Of course it was. I staggered to the door and peered through the bars. I was looking out into a larger room. A diner. The classic roadside kind. Red vinyl booths, cracked and taped up. A long Formica countertop with chrome-rimmed stools bolted to the floor. A jukebox stood silent in the corner, its colorful lights dark. But the place was dead. Not just closed for the night dead. It was abandoned. Dust coated every surface, and the air hung thick and stagnant. Beyond the diner's large plate glass windows, I could see nothing but the same oppressive, inky blackness of the desert night. This was no sanctuary. This was something else. A stage. A set piece in their elaborate production. I rattled the door to my little room. It was solid steel, locked tight. I was a prisoner. I slumped against the door, the cold metal a shock against my skin. Where the hell was I? And why wasn't I already dead in a ditch? The sound of footsteps approaching from across the diner floor made me freeze. A figure emerged from the shadows near the kitchen. It was the trooper. He was out of uniform now, dressed in jeans and a plain black sweatshirt. He was holding a steaming mug of coffee, and he moved with a casual air of ownership, as if he were home. He pulled up a stool at the counter, directly across from my door, and took a slow sip. "Morning," he said, his voice back to that unervingly calm baritone. "Or night. Hard to tell out here. Sleep well." I didn't answer. I just stared at him through the bars, my mind racing. I had to find a way out. I had to understand what was happening. He seemed to read my thoughts. "You're wondering where you are? This is the Ryerson Creek Diner. Closed down about 15 years ago when the mining company pulled out. Nobody comes out this way anymore. Nobody even remembers it's here. It's a quiet place, perfect for business." He took another sip of coffee. "And you're wondering why you're still breathing. Simple. You became a complication. Dead truckers on the I-80 attract state police, federal attention. That's messy, bad for business. But a trucker who vanishes? A guy with maybe a few gambling debts, a messy divorce? Guys like that walk away from their lives all the time. They get tired of the road, find a new life somewhere else. It's a cleaner narrative." It all clicked into place with a sickening thud. They weren't going to kill me. They were going to erase me. The empty diner, the isolation, this was my cage. This was where I would disappear. They had my truck, my phone, my wallet. They would drain my bank accounts from some computer 1,000 miles away, create a false trail, and Jackson Rourke would simply cease to exist. The thought was more terrifying than death. It was the complete annihilation of my identity. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice a dry rasp. The trooper smiled, a genuine smile this time, and it was the most chilling thing I'd ever seen. "We're entrepreneurs, Jack. We acquire assets that are poorly protected and redistribute them. You were just a delivery boy. The problem is you saw a face. You saw my face. That makes you a liability, and liabilities have to be managed." He gestured with his mug toward the dark windows. "Out there, your truck is being stripped as we speak. The cargo is already on its way to a new buyer. The cabin chassis will be repainted, given new numbers, and put back into service in a different part of the country within a week. The trailer will be cut up for scrap. By the time anyone even starts looking for it, the Iron Saint will be a ghost." He was laying it all out for me. The sheer scale, the chilling efficiency of it. This wasn't just a hijacking. It was a corporation, a shadow company operating in the empty spaces of the country, using the desolation as a shield. And this forgotten diner, this dusty relic of a bygone era, wasn't just a holding cell. I looked around at the decaying booths, the dead jukebox, the layers of dust. This was their headquarters, their nest, the very heart of the trap I had stumbled into. The trooper finished his coffee and placed the mug on the counter with a soft clink. "Get some rest, Jack. We got a long day tomorrow. We need to figure out what to do with a liability like you." He stood up and walked back into the shadows he'd come from, leaving me alone in my cell. I looked past him through the large front windows of the diner. Far in the distance, I saw a familiar shape. It was the Iron Saint, parked under a large, open-sided hangar, bathed in the cold, sterile light of portable work lamps. Figures were moving around it, working quickly and silently, like ants dissecting a beetle. They were already taking her apart, and from a flagpole over the diner, illuminated by a single, harsh spotlight, hung a tattered, unfamiliar flag, flapping softly in the night breeze. It wasn't the stars and stripes. It was a black flag with a single, stylized red hourglass in the center. Watching them dismantle the Iron Saint was a unique form of torture. From my cell, I had a perfect, heart-wrenching view through the diner's grimy front window. They were methodical, efficient, and utterly disrespectful. They worked under the harsh glare of portable floodlights, their movements quick and practiced. I saw them peel the vinyl lettering of her name off the cab door with a heat gun, the elegant script of the Iron Saint bunching up like burnt skin before being tossed aside. They unbolted the sleeper cab, lifting it clean off the frame with a small, portable crane, leaving the chassis looking naked and violated. Each removed part felt like a physical blow. That truck was my history, my partner. 22 years of sunrises and sunsets, of storms weathered and miles conquered, being erased piece by piece in a dusty Nevada graveyard. The trooper, I started calling him the warden in my head, left me alone for hours. The sedative had worn off, but it left a residue of deep, bone-wearying exhaustion in its wake. My head throbbed, my body ached, and a profound, hopeless lethargy settled over me. Despair is heavy. It saps your strength, fogs your mind. I tried to think, to plan, but my thoughts were sluggish, circling the same terrifying facts. I was in a cage. My truck was gone. My identity was being stolen. There was no escape. I paced the small room, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. The motion was useless, but it was better than succumbing to the crushing weight of stillness. I examined the door again. Solid steel. The lock was external. The walls were that cheap, brittle laminate, but I could feel solid wood or maybe even cinder block behind them. The barred window in the door was my only connection to the larger world of the diner, and through it, to the slow, methodical murder of my rig. Hours bled into one another. The sky outside the diner windows began to lighten, from inky black to a deep, bruised purple, then to a pale, washed-out gray. The dawn brought no hope, only a clearer view of my prison. The diner was even more dilapidated in the daylight. I could see where mice had chewed through the vinyl seats, and the chrome on the stools was pitted with rust. The whole place felt like a forgotten tomb. The crew outside finished their work on my truck, hitching my now unidentifiable trailer to one of their own tractors and hauling it away into the desert. Another team was already sandblasting the frame of my cab. By noon, she would be unrecognizable. Sometime mid-morning, the warden returned. He didn't bring coffee this time. He just stood on the other side of the door, watching me. His expression was flat, unreadable. "You're a problem, Jack," he said, breaking the long silence. A loose end. My associates believe the simplest solution is the best one. A bullet and a hole in the desert floor. My mouth went dry. I pressed myself against the back wall of the cell, as far from him as I could get. "But I see things differently," he continued, his voice dangerously soft. "I see potential. You're a damn good driver. 22 years, not a single major accident, not a single lost load until us. You know the roads, the schedules, the culture. That kind of experience is an asset." I stared at him, not understanding. "We have a vacancy," he said, a thin smile playing on his lips. "One of our drivers made a mistake on a run down in Arizona last month. Got greedy, got caught. We had to terminate his employment. We need a replacement. Someone reliable. Someone who understands the consequences of failure." He was offering me a job. The idea was so grotesque, so insane, that I almost laughed. He wanted me to drive for them, to become one of them, to haul stolen loads in a stolen truck, a ghost driver for a shadow corporation. "You're crazy," I breathed. "I'm practical," he countered. "Your life as Jackson Rourke is over either way. We have your wallet, your credentials. We can create a new identity for you. New papers, new name. You'll be a ghost on the payroll, making more money in a month than you used to make in a year. The alternative is being a ghost in the ground. It's your choice." He slid a plastic bottle of water and a shrink-wrapped sandwich through the food slot at the bottom of the door. "Think about it. I'll be back for your answer tonight." He walked away, leaving me with the choice. A life of damnation or a quick death. The sheer exhaustion, the psychological battering, the hopelessness, it was all-consuming. I sank down to the floor, my back against the wall. I picked up the sandwich. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. I was starving, but the thought of eating their food felt like a surrender. Still, my body betrayed me. I ate it mechanically, without tasting it. My mind was a whirlwind of terror and confusion. I was so tired, so profoundly, deeply tired. My eyes started to droop. The sandwich, it tasted funny, a strange, chemical bitterness. My thoughts grew hazy, my limbs heavy. The room started to spin. They drugged the food. Of course they had. It was another test, or maybe just a way to keep me docile. As the darkness swirled in again, a critical mistake surfaced in my drug-addled mind. I had told them my dispatcher's name, Mark. In my panicked, initial report to the fake trooper, I'd rehearsed the epic speech I was going to give Mark. It was a tiny detail, a meaningless slip of the tongue. But in my current state, it felt like a catastrophic error, another piece of myself I had handed over to them, another tool they could use to dismantle my world. The second drugging was worse than the first. It wasn't the clean, professional fade to black of the trooper's syringe. This was a dirty, disorienting trip. I woke up thrashing, tangled in the scratchy blanket, my heart pounding a frantic, irregular beat. The small room was pitch black. They turned off the light. I scrambled up, my head thick and soupy, a brutal hangover from a drug I hadn't asked for. I stumbled to the door, pressing my face against the bars. The diner was dark too, lit only by the cold, distant starlight filtering through the plate glass windows. Outside, the work lamps were off. The hangar was just a skeletal shadow. The nest was sleeping. My choice: life as a slave or death in the desert. The warden's offer echoed in my mind. It was no choice at all. It was a psychological game designed to break me down completely before they repurposed me or disposed of me. And it was working. I felt a sliver of my will, the core of who I was beginning to crack. The exhaustion was a cancer. The paranoia was a fever. Every shadow seemed to hold a thread. Every silence was filled with unspoken menace. I was at the absolute bottom, cornered, powerless, and my mind, my last refuge, was becoming a traitor. The memory of my mistake, mentioning my dispatcher, Mark, kept circling back, a vulture in my thoughts. Why did that matter so much? It was a tiny, insignificant detail, but they were masters of detail. They knew my name, the name of my truck, my route. They knew everything. What could they do with the name, Mark? My drug-addled brain spun out scenarios. They could call him. They could threaten him. They could use him to further legitimize my disappearance, to make the story of Jack the trucker who just walked away more convincing. They could tell him I'd called from a burner phone, saying I was quitting, that I'd had enough. Mark would be confused, but he'd have no reason to doubt it. It was another brick in the wall they were building around my memory. I slid down the wall to the floor, my head in my hands. The cold concrete felt real, grounding. I had to stop this spiral. I was a professional, a survivor. Even at the bottom, you look for a handhold. I took a deep breath, trying to force the drug fog out of my brain. I had nothing. No weapon, no tool, no escape route. My truck was gone, a collection of parts scattered to the wind. My name was being erased. The warden's words came back to me. We need a replacement, someone who understands the consequences of failure. They didn't just want a driver. They wanted a broken one. They wanted someone who had seen the abyss and would do anything to avoid falling back in. This job offer wasn't an act of mercy. It was the final stage of my destruction. I looked through the bars again, my eyes slowly adjusting to the gloom. And I saw something I hadn't noticed before in the chaos and the bright lights. It was on the floor, near the end of the Formica counter, almost hidden in the deep shadows cast by a row of stools. It was a piece of my truck, a small, insignificant piece they had overlooked in their immaculate, efficient cleanup. It was the custom gear shift knob from the Iron Saint. It was a solid brass fist, something I'd bought at a truck show in Louisville a decade ago. It was polished smooth from 10 years of my hand, my sweat, my life. It was heavy, solid, and uniquely mine. One of the grunts must have unscrewed it and dropped it, and it had rolled under the counter, forgotten. They had stripped my truck down to the frame, but they had missed this one, small, intensely personal piece of her. Seeing it sitting there in the dark didn't give me hope. Hope was a luxury I couldn't afford. It did something else. It anchored me. It was a tangible link to the man I had been just 24 hours ago. Jackson Rourke, owner and operator of the Iron Saint. A man who had a name, a history. A man who wouldn't just become a ghost. My mind cleared a little. The despair didn't vanish, but it receded, replaced by a single, cold, hard thought. They made a mistake. A tiny one, but a mistake nonetheless. In their perfect, sterile operation, they had left something behind. They had overlooked a piece of the puzzle. The thought didn't show me a way out, but it proved they weren't gods. They were just men, and men can bleed. I had to get to it. It was more than just a memento. It was heavy, solid, a weapon, the only one I had. But it was 20 feet away, on the other side of a locked steel door. I was still in the cage. The warden would be back in the morning for my answer. My answer would be no, and then my time would be up. I was cornered, my truck was gone, my life was forfeit. But as I stared at that brass fist gleaming faintly in the starlight, a flicker of something primal and defiant ignited in the cold ashes of my despair. The hunt wasn't over. The sight of that brass fist did something to my chemistry. The fog of exhaustion and drugs didn't vanish, but a new element was introduced into the mix: focus. It was a cold, sharp focus, born not of hope, but of pure, undiluted necessity. The warden wanted a broken man. I had to convince him he had one, right up until the moment I proved him wrong. I spent the next few hours in a state of meticulous observation. My cell was a cage, but every cage has a weak point. I ran my hands over every inch of the cheap wood paneling, tapping softly, listening for hollow spots. I examined the cot. Welded steel frame, bolted to the floor. Useless. The door was the only way. I stared at it, imprinting every detail in my mind. The hinges, the simple, heavy-duty deadbolt on the outside, the small food slot at the bottom. The food slot. It was maybe a foot wide and 4 inches high, a simple hinge flap of metal. Big enough for a sandwich, a bottle of water. Too small for a man to crawl through. But it was a hole in the door. It was a flaw in the design of my cage. And then another piece of the puzzle clicked into place, another memory from the haze. The warden. When he'd come to my door the first time with the coffee, he'd pulled up a stool at the counter. He'd been casual, arrogant, and he'd left the mug sitting right there, just a few feet from the door, right near where my gear shift knob lay hidden in the shadows. It was a long shot, a desperate, insane idea, but it was the only one I had. The sky began to lighten again, the same miserable gray dawn as the day before. I heard movement from another part of the diner, the sound of a generator kicking on, the murmur of voices. The nest was waking up. I composed myself. I slumped onto the cot, my back against the wall, and tried to look like the broken man they wanted me to be. I let my shoulders sag, kept my head down, my breathing shallow. I had to sell it. My life depended on the performance. Soon enough, footsteps approached. It was the warden. He stood on the other side of the door, a silhouette against the growing light. "Have a time to think, Jack?" he asked, his voice calm, confident. He already knew my answer. He thought he'd crush me. I looked up slowly, meeting his gaze through the bars. I let my voice tremble, laced it with the static of defeat. I don't have a choice, do I?" A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. "No, you don't. But it's important that you understand that. Welcome to the team." What happens now?" I asked, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor. "Now, you prove your value. You're going to help us prep a rig for a run tonight. Show us you know your way around a Kenworth. Show us you can follow orders. Then we'll talk about your first assignment." He paused. "I'm going to have someone bring you breakfast. You eat, you get your strength back. We have a lot of work to do." He turned to leave, and my heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment. "Wait," I said, my voice just above a whisper. He stopped, turning back. "What is it?" "The coffee," I said, my voice cracking. Could I just get a cup of coffee? Black. It's been a while." It was a perfect request for a beaten man, a small creature comfort, a plea for a shred of normalcy. The warden stared at me for a long moment, assessing me. I could feel his eyes boring into me, searching for any hint of deception. I kept my gaze downcast, my body language screaming surrender. Finally, he gave a short, sharp nod. "Fine," he said. "Coffee." He walked over to the counter where an industrial coffee maker was already gurgling. I heard him pour the coffee, the liquid splashing into a ceramic mug. He walked back toward my door. My whole body was coiled like a spring. He wasn't going to open the door. He was going to pass it through the food slot. The metal flap squeaked as he pushed it open from the outside. A square of light appeared at the bottom of my door. I was on my knees in an instant, my hands out. "Thank you," I mumbled, reaching for the mug. My fingers brushed against his as I took it. For a split second, we were connected. As he pulled his hand back, I didn't retreat. In one swift, desperate motion, I shot my arm through the slot, all the way up to my shoulder. My fingers stretched, straining, reaching for the leg of the stool he'd sat on yesterday. My fingertips brushed against the cold chrome. It was just out of reach. He started to pull the flap closed, but my arm was blocking it. "What the hell are you doing?" he snarled. I ignored him, my muscles screaming in protest. I twisted my body, pushing harder, gaining another precious inch. My fingers hooked around the leg of the stool. With a grunt of exertion, I yanked. The stool screeched as it fell over, clattering against the floor and knocking into the one next to it. And just as I'd gambled, the heavy brass fist of my gearshift knob, dislodged by the impact, rolled out from under the counter and came to a stop in the open space, not 5 feet from my door. The warden slammed the food slot shut on my arm. Pain exploded from my elbow to my shoulder, but I didn't let go. He was on the other side, cursing, trying to pull the door flap closed, but my arm, wedged in the frame, was trapped. I had him. He couldn't lock me in, and he couldn't get away. And my weapon, my one flicker of hope in the darkness, was now lying tantalizingly in the open, just waiting for the cage to break. The pain in my arm was excruciating, a white-hot scream of crushed bone and muscle. The warden was on the other side of the door, throwing his weight against the food slot, trying to sever my arm or force me to pull it back. I gritted my teeth, tasting blood where I'd bitten my cheek. The world narrowed to that single point of agony and the sight of the brass fist lying on the dusty floor. It was a still life of my last chance. "Let go, you son of a bitch!" The warden roared, his voice no longer calm and controlled, but a raw, furious snarl. I could hear his boots scraping on the floor as he braced himself. But the pain was a fire that burned away the last of the sedative, the last of the fear. It was purifying. I roared back, a wordless bellow of defiance, and used his own leverage against him. As he shoved, I yanked, pulling my trapped arm and the entire door with it. The old hinges groaned in protest. The steel door, which had seemed so impenetrable, shuddered in its frame. He wasn't expecting me to fight back. He was expecting a broken man. I had a few seconds at most. He'd recover. He'd draw his weapon. He'd call for help. I had to end this now. With my left hand, my free hand, I braced myself against the wall of my cell and kicked at the door with all my strength. My boot slammed into the wood laminate right next to the lock. The cheap paneling splintered, but the wood behind it held. "You're dead," the warden screamed, a new note of panic in his voice. He was losing control. I kicked again, aiming for the same spot. A loud crack echoed through the diner. I kicked a third time, channeling every mile I'd ever driven, every storm I'd ever weathered, into that single point of impact. The door jamb, weakened by years of rot and neglect, splintered and gave way. The lock, its housing shattered, disengaged. The heavy steel door swung inward with a deafening groan, tearing my arm free from the mangled food slot as it moved. I stumbled out of the cell, my right arm a useless, burning weight at my side. The warden was scrambling backward, his eyes wide with disbelief, his hand flying to the pistol holstered at his hip. But I was closer to the prize. I dove, my good arm outstretched, and my fingers wrapped around the cold, heavy brass of the gearshift knob. It felt like coming home. He drew his weapon, a sleek semi-automatic, and leveled it at my chest. "Don't move." I didn't listen. I rolled, coming up onto one knee, the brass fist clutched tight in my left hand. He was 10 feet away, too far for me to close the distance before he could fire. The diner was silent except for our ragged breathing. The other members of his crew, hearing the commotion, would be here any second. This was the final gamble. My plan wasn't to survive a firefight. It was to rewrite the narrative. He saw me as a liability, a loose end. I had to become something else, something he couldn't manage. "You made a mistake," I gasped, my voice raw. "You should have put a bullet in me on the highway. Last chance, old man. Drop it." His aim was steady, his finger tightening on the trigger. I looked past him toward the large plate glass windows of the diner. Behind them, the generator I'd heard earlier sat on a small concrete pad. It was a big, industrial diesel model, with thick black cables snaking from it toward the diner and the hangar. A fuel line ran from a large red tank right into the generator's engine. The whole operation, the lights, the tools, their entire nest depended on it. I didn't throw the brass fist at him. That would be useless. He'd dodge it and shoot me. Instead, with a final desperate surge of adrenaline, I hurled it with my good arm, not at him, but at the window. The heavy brass knob flew through the air, a spinning, glittering arc of defiance. It smashed through the plate glass with a thunderous crash, the window erupting into a spiderweb of cracks before collapsing inward in a shower of glittering shards. The sudden noise was like a bomb going off in the quiet desert morning. The warden flinched, his aim faltering for a fraction of a second as the glass rained down. It was the only opening I needed. I surged forward, charging him, my bad arms screaming in protest. I wasn't trying to fight him. I was just trying to get past him. He fired. The shot was deafening inside the diner, the bullet whipping past my ear and smashing into the wall behind me. He fired again, but I was already on him, crashing into him with the full force of my body weight. We went down in a tangle of limbs, the gun flying from his grasp and skittering across the floor into the darkness under a booth. I didn't stay to fight. I scrambled up and sprinted for the shattered window, ignoring the jagged teeth of glass still in the frame. I vaulted through, cutting my hands on my side, and landed hard on the dusty ground outside. The generator was right there, chugging away, the heart of their operation. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the nozzle from the diesel tank, yanked the fuel line free from the generator's intake, and began spraying fuel everywhere. Over the generator, the fuel tank, the dry wooden wall of the diner itself. The final act. The last piece of the plan. I pulled a book of matches from my back pocket, the one thing from my wallet I'd managed to palm before the trooper took it. A souvenir from a diner in Cheyenne. My hands were slick with blood and diesel, but I managed to strike one. The flames sputtered to life, a tiny, beautiful star in the morning gloom. I looked back at the diner. The warden was staggering to his feet inside. Other figures were running from the hangar, shouting in alarm. They were too late. I tossed the match. The world erupted. The diesel fuel didn't just burn, it detonated. A wave of heat and force threw me backward, and I landed hard in the dirt 20 feet away. The air itself seemed to be on fire. The generator exploded in a plume of black smoke and twisted metal. The fuel tank went up a second later, a massive, whooshing roar that turned the entire side of the diner into a wall of ravenous orange flame. The dry, ancient wood of the building caught instantly, the fire climbing the walls and pouring through the shattered window with a hungry howl. I scrambled to my feet, my body a symphony of pain. My right arm was a wreck, my side was bleeding, and my ears were ringing from the blast. But I was alive, and I was free. I didn't wait to watch it burn. I turned and ran, plunging into the scrubland behind the diner, away from the road, away from the inferno. Shouts and screams rose from the compound behind me, sounds of panic and chaos. Their nest was compromised. Their perfect, quiet operation had been shattered by a single, desperate act of arson. I ran until my lungs were bursting and my legs were jelly. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to put distance between myself and that place. Every so often, I glanced back. A thick, greasy column of black smoke was climbing into the pale morning sky, a funeral pyre for my old life and a beacon for anyone within 100 miles. The fire was my confession, my testimony, my last will and testament. It said, Jackson Rourke was here. Something happened here. They couldn't erase that. I stumbled through the desert for what felt like days, but was probably only hours. The sun climbed, beating down on me. I was dehydrated, bleeding, and running on pure, uncut adrenaline. Finally, I collapsed in the shade of a rocky outcropping. My race finished. I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness. The image of the fire burned onto the back of my eyelids. That's where they found me. Not the warden's crew, but a pair of prospectors in a beat-up old Jeep, drawn by the smoke plume. They thought I was a ghost, a wild-eyed man in torn, bloody clothes, babbling about a war in the desert. They gave me water, wrapped my arm in a dirty rag, and drove me to the nearest town, a dusty speck on the map called Eureka. They dropped me at the sheriff's office and disappeared, probably not wanting to get involved. The The story I told the sheriff was a heavily edited version of the truth. I told him I was a trucker. I told him I was hijacked. I told him they took me to a compound in the desert, that I escaped and set a fire to cover my tracks. I left out the details that sounded insane. The trooper, the voice on the phone, the corporation of ghosts. I just gave him enough to sound like a traumatized victim, not a madman. He looked at my injuries, heard the conviction in my voice, and he believed me. Or at least, he believed enough to send a deputy out to check on the smoke. They found the diner, or what was left of it. A charred, smoking foundation. The remains of several vehicles, including the sandblasted, half-disassembled frame of a Peterbilt 389. They found no bodies. The warden and his crew had vanished back into the empty spaces they came from. The official report lists me as the sole victim of an elaborate and highly organized hijacking ring. The case is still open, filed away in a cabinet collecting dust. So here I sit, in this truck stop cafe, 1,000 miles and a lifetime away from that patch of scorched earth in Nevada. My arm healed, but it's never been the same. It aches when the weather turns cold, a constant reminder. I don't drive anymore. I can't. The hum of the engine doesn't sound like comfort to me now. It sounds like a warning. The open road doesn't look like freedom. It looks like a hunting ground. I lost my truck. I lost my nerve. I lost the man I used to be. I want my life back, but the price was everything that life was built on. A Pyrrhic victory, I think they call it. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the warden. I think about his organization. They're still out there. They lost a nest, but they'll build another. They're too smart, too efficient to be stopped by one fire. And I can't shake the feeling that my file isn't closed for them, either. I was the liability who fought back. The loose end that refused to be tied. Men like that don't forget. That's why I'm telling you this, here, in the dim light of this lonely place. To get out. To make it real. But there's another reason. Last week, I was working my new job, a mechanic at a big fleet yard, and a truck came in for a routine service. A brand new Kenworth. As I was checking the cab, I saw the gear shift knob. It was a custom job. A solid black onyx skull with small, red rubies for eyes. It was gaudy, not my style. But tucked into the logbook holder on the dash, I saw a slip of paper. It was a fuel receipt from a truck stop in Ryerson, Nevada. A place that, according to any map, doesn't exist. And written on the back, in neat, block letters, were two words. We're hiring.